Welcome back to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I'm Glenn Caruso, head football coach at the University of St. Thomas, and so happy you tuned in. You know, quite often we get so caught up in the daily grind of work or coaching or recruiting that we don't often take time to reflect. I would encourage everybody to take just a few minutes each day to try and see the bigger picture, to stop and realize that in the end, we're going to be judged on what we choose to believe, who we choose to love, and what we decide to leave behind in the hearts and minds of not just our players, not just our coworkers, but also our children. And remember, if we're doing it right, we're coaching football for life.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Our guest today is Coach Jim Grobe. Coach Grobe was a former head football coach at Ohio University, Wake Forest University, and spent 1 year as a head coach at Baylor University. Greetings, Coach. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Ty.
Now, Coach, you have over 40 years as a football coach, period, with right at about 20 years as a head coach. You worked with Fisher DeBerry, I think, at Air Force, who's one of the legends in the coaching profession, and you did a lot of things as a head coach and very successful at the things you've done, specifically those three programs, right? And you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but all three were in some sort of disrepair when you arrived, right? And I guess you figure out a way to
that. Yeah, I think you could say that for sure, Ty. We were at Ohio University when we went there. We was on the nation's longest losing streak, and Wake Forest was 2-9 the year before we got there. And then Baylor was completely different. Baylor had been 10-3, but Coach Browse was no longer the coach, and there was quite a bit of turmoil there when we went in.
Right. And as the head coach, you managed to stabilize each program. You mentioned Baylor. Thinking about that Baylor program, you come in for 1 year and you take them to a bowl game. As, like you mentioned, Art Browse was removed as a head coach, and Baylor was working on repairing its reputation. I wonder, you look at those all three stops. What aspects of leading a program would you say helped you at all three stops? It was probably different for all three, I imagine.
Yeah, the thing was, Ty, all the coaches that I followed were really good football coaches. At Ohio, Tom Lichtenberg had been the head coach, and then at Wake Forest, Jim Caldwell was the head coach before I got there, and then, of course, at Baylor, Art Browse was the head coach, and all three of these coaches were good football coaches. Some guys take over a program and spend time criticizing the former coaches in the program. And, we made a concerted effort not to be critical of anything the former coaches or players had done or that the school and the program had done. I really didn't want anyone on our staff to waste time making excuses and dwelling on the past. And so what we did, we just tried to embrace the players that we inherited. We never tried to run players off. We worked the kids really hard and had some defections, but tried to coach the guys that we inherited with a win-now approach. I think some guys take over a program and they kind of think if they don't do well the first couple of years and then make a splash, it makes it look better. But we always tried to win as soon as we possibly could. And we tried really hard not to dwell on the negatives, facilities, budget, talent, those type things. We felt like it was a waste of time to dwell on those things, so we tried to just focus on coaching at Ohio and at Wake. And, of course, at Baylor, it was a totally different deal from Ohio University and Wake Forest. Baylor had great facilities, great budget, great talent. The main job there for us was to repair, the damage that had occurred off the field.
Right. I guess you come into Baylor and looking at it as a 1 year situation, but then Ohio and Wake Forest, the assessment time, you come in and look, you see the talent you have. Like you mentioned, you work with the talent you have. You wouldn't want to run anybody off. This is who we have. Let's coach them up and try to be great. And you assess the talent, you assess the program, you assess the facilities, you assess the leadership. You do all this, I guess, in the interview process, and then you get on campus and figure out what's really going on, and you have time to figure out what the long-term plan is to build a successful program.
It's probably best to, look at the assessment process at Ohio and Wake differently than Baylor for sure. When we got to Ohio, the talent level overall was way down. The numbers were down, so depth was a big issue. We played a lot of true freshmen in our first season, I wish we'd been more patient because some of the best players in school history graduated a year early. We didn't feel like our talent level fit any particular scheme at Ohio, so we tried to do things that nobody else in the MAC was doing. We adopted a triple option attack that we brought with us from Air Force, and nobody in the Mid-American Conference was running the triple option. And then we ran a 3-4 scheme on defense. Most of the teams in the Mid-American Conference were 4-3 teams. So we felt that by being a little bit different at Ohio, it would give us a little bit of an advantage. And then when we got to Wake Forest, things were a little bit different. We were really surprised to find that the talent level at Wake Forest was really good. Coach Caldwell left us some really good players at Wake Forest, and, of course, we had to pull them all together. But we had a good quarterback, and we had some good receivers in the throw game, pretty good offensive line and running backs. Depth was a little bit of an issue, but we had tough kids, and the kids liked to play. And so our personnel was better at Wake overall than what we had at Ohio.
Right. I wonder, you come into that situation, or even before you came in, of course, I worked for Coach Taft for a long time at the Coaches Association. And he calls you with this opportunity, which you probably had heard about. I mean, it was in the national news what was going on at Baylor, but you get a call from Coach Taft, and he's essentially asking you to come in and do a favor for a school that he loves. What questions do you ask at that moment when you think about coming in and trying to be a stabilizer for one season?
Well, Ty, Coach Taft was my mentor. I ran his ethics committee with the American Football Coaches Association for several years. He told me that was a big job and I wouldn't have to do anything else, and he still found time to put me on the All-America committee and the rules committee and all kinds of different committees and the board of trustees. You've been there before.
I know all about it.
But there's nobody really in football or in the world, for that matter, that I admire more than Coach Taft. So I was totally trusting of Coach Taft. The thing was, Holly and I just found out that morning that they'd made a change at Baylor, and we had actually driven to the grocery store, and I'm getting ready to get out of the car, and Coach Taft calls, and he doesn't know that I've got him on speakerphone. And so when he starts talking about coming out to Waco and helping him at Baylor, he had no idea that Holly was listening to this, and she's totally in that retirement mode, So I wish he could have seen her expression when he started bringing that up. But we came home and talked about it and prayed about it, and just felt like that, it was something that we really needed to do, not only for Coach Taft, but I really felt like those players, could probably use somebody to come out in and put their arm around their neck and hug them and pick them up and get them going in the right direction. Because I knew that even though they'd had some problems and they'd had some players misbehave and all those kind of things, I knew that there was probably a ton of great kids there that needed somebody to come in and support them. So it really was a blessing for Holly and I to be able to go out and help.
Right, which I imagine they appreciated. I wonder what questions you asked when you guys prayed about it and you said, we'll do this. Then you start asking questions about how to approach the situation, either of the administration, back to Coach Taft, or even when you get in, you talk to the players. Tell me about some of the questions you asked of yourself and of them.
Yeah, well, that Coach Taft, I had total trust in him, so we talked all the time. And funny thing is, something would pop up in his mind, and I'm getting up at the crack of dawn. Holly and I'd go walk around Baylor's campus real early in the morning before I got into work, and so I'd be getting ready to crash, and about 10:30, 11 o'clock. I think Coach is a night owl. He stays up really late, so he'd call me and see how things are going, make sure I was doing good, and then if he had some thoughts or whatever, he'd let me know. But he was my number one sounding board. And the other thing that was interesting at Baylor was that they told me that I could make changes if I needed to. So I went in with the idea that I would kind of keep the staff in place. I thought that was best for the players. My number one thought was how to keep the players, do the best that I could for the players that were there. And I thought the best thing we could do is keep the staff in place if we could. And so we did that. And that was a little bit challenging because, they were loyal to Coach Briles, and I understood that, and they were really sad about what had happened. But I felt like if we could keep those guys, coaching the kids, that would give the kids the best chance on the field. Of course, off the field, we did a lot of things to, talk to the kids about character, integrity, all those type things. But on the field, I felt like the best thing we could do is keep the schemes the same, keep the staff the same, and try to give these kids, especially the seniors, a chance to have as good a season as they possibly could. The biggest question that I had, as far as the head coach there, was the type of players that we had, and I'm really talking more about character than ability. And so I tried to talk to each of the coaches about their position group and how they felt about their players. And it was obvious after some summer workouts and the ability to visit with the coaches about their guys and to watch these guys, that we really had a large group of kids that just had wonderful character and integrity, and it's a shame when a large group of kids can be damaged so badly by a few people. And so I found out really quickly that we had the right kind of kids that you want to coach, and that was probably my biggest question, was not so much the ability. When you watched them run and work out, you knew you had great talent, but my concern was their commitment to each other, their ability to be good team members, those type things, because we really had to have everybody pulling on the same end of the rope. I really was looking for problems. I felt like that any problems that we had, behavior-wise or attitude-wise or anything like that we'd have to make a change. But all in all, Ty, I just found a wonderful group of kids, and I loved meeting the parents. They had great parents, and I think the best thing I did was give those guys a hug and pull them along, and I was their champion. I really came in for them. I didn't come for any other reason. Coach Taft asked me to come in for a season, and that's what I did. I didn't come in with the idea of down the road. I just came in with a one-season thought: how can I help these kids get through this season as best they can? And we did it a day at a time. But the number one question that I had was, what kind of kids do we have? And then the other question that I had was, how would this thing work, keeping that coaching staff together? Because I knew they were very loyal to Art. And I really couldn't get that question answered until I spent some time with them. But we had a great group of coaches that had done very well in the past, and I think we helped the players by keeping those guys intact, coaching the same things on offense and defense, kicking game, that sort of thing. And we had some ups and downs, and we really started out really well and got about halfway through the season. Our quarterback got hurt. We had to put a freshman quarterback on the field, and he did a great job for us. But, we lost some really close games, some tough games. And then by the end of the season, played Boise State, and kids played just absolutely lights out. We had a great win, and it was just nice to see the kids have a lot of fun in that last game. They kind of put everything behind and just went and played.
Yeah, it takes a certain ilk of leadership, right, to come into a situation knowing you're not going to be there for long, and you come in selfless, right? This is about the kids. We want to make sure the kids are in a good position and help them to have fun, especially the seniors, right? Help them to have fun their senior year and help the staff to stay cohesive and not even thinking about the future. Let's just think about right now. That had to be a tough situation, and it looked like you did it very well there. I have one more question for you, Coach. I wonder about people coming into leading organizations or programs or, administrations or corporate offices or whatever. What kind of advice you have in terms of leadership and people assessing a place either when they start or when they're considering taking on a leadership role?
Well, I would say, Ty, in response to some of the comments you just made, my most rewarding year in football was the year I spent at Baylor. I don't think I ever helped players or coaches more than that year that we spent together, and they helped me as much as I helped them. But the really nice thing was that year was all about the players. It had nothing to do with, I'd had a good career. I wasn't going in trying to use Baylor as a next career, as a move, a stepping stone, or extend my career by going to Baylor. I really just went to Baylor to help, and that was probably as good a feeling as I've ever had in my coaching career. And we've won a lot of games and won an ACC championship, played an Orange Bowl with Wake Forest, which doesn't happen very often, did some of those great things. But the year that I spent at Baylor, I felt like, that was probably my most rewarding year because of not in terms of wins and losses, but what we were able to do with the kids.
It probably took you back to your core purpose for getting into the game in the first place, right?
Absolutely, and that's one thing I worry a little bit about in today's world. I don't think most of the old school coaches, we only, when I got out of University of Virginia, I really wanted to play NFL football. I just wasn't good enough. And the thing that you did is you got into coaching, but just because you loved the game. Now, there wasn't this kind of money being made in coaching back then. You just got into coaching because you wanted to stay close to the game, and couldn't. And really, for me, it was because I couldn't play. I would have played instead of coached if I could. I wasn't good enough. When you're short and slow and you play linebacker, it's not a good thing. But when I left UVA, when I was leaving UVA, I just had to figure out a way to stay close to football. And I stayed on as a graduate assistant and then coached high school football and then D3 football. And then, was at Marshall for 5 years and then went out to Air Force for 11 years and then coached in the Mid-American Conference for 6 years at Ohio, and then went to Wake in the ACC and played in the ACC at Virginia. So that was a dream for me to get back there. But I will say this, if I was given advice to young coaches and administrators coming in, the number one thing that I would say, Ty, is surround yourself with good people. I think that's the number one key. You need smart people, you need people with good ideas, and you need people that have good background and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think there's ever a substitute for character and integrity and hard work and all those kind of things. And if you surround yourself with good people, they tend to elevate you. So, that would be, probably my number one thought for people that are in leadership roles or maybe just coming into leadership roles is, to make sure you surround yourself with good people. And I think it's critically important if you're in coaching to emphasize that to your players. I think if players will associate with good people, then it raises everything. It raises their work ethic, their integrity, their character, all those type things, and they kind of feed off each other. And Coach DeBerry at the Air Force Academy, he used to say this all the time. I got so tired of hearing this, but he said it over and over and over. He kept telling the team, "You are who you associate with."
Right.
And I mean, he told our players that so many times. And then you know what happened when I got to be head coach. I just told our players time after time, guys, you are who you associate with. And I've certainly found that to be true. And as a leader, I think probably the number one thing I could say is to guys coming into, and maybe girls coming into a leadership role, that if you set a great example, others will follow.
All right. That's true, Coach. Well, this has been an excellent conversation, Coach. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question podcast.
I enjoyed it, Ty. Thank you, man.
That was Coach Jim Grobe. He is the former head football coach at Ohio University, Wake Forest University, and he spent 1 year as a head football coach at Baylor University. And of course, this is Ty Brown with the One Question Leadership Podcast. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.